Thanks, Amy. Good morning, everybody. For those that don't know me, I'm Group Captain Gordon Bettington, the Station Commander here at Royal Air Force College, Cranwell. Thank you for joining us on what will be a bit of an experiment as we come through lockdown and all the restrictions we've had over 3 months. We're getting much better at using technology like Zoom to try and tell our story. And I know Hazel has got a real action-packed, lively 40 minutes taking you on a journey through the college's history from our very beginnings up to present day, and using some of the fabulous artefacts that we have in the collection under her curatorship to tell that journey. And I thought it was such a novel, a new thing to do. I'd take a few minutes to introduce it myself, but I'll very quickly shut up and hand over to the true expert, which is Hazel. Before I go, just one final plug, and I know Hazel will mention that towards the end of her presentation. We have commissioned a College Voices project as part of the college's 100-year centenary. That's 100 years since cadets came through the college, starting on the 5th of Feb 1920. So we're looking for lots of people to tell us their story, be it somebody who's here as a trainee, a member of staff, a contractor, they worked in the tailor's shop, they worked in the cost cutter shop, wherever that might be. We're interested in hearing your stories, and we've got a form and some paperwork that people can fill in, tell us their experience at Cranwell, and then perhaps when we get a moment when things return to normality, we'll invite you to the college or come out and see you at home and get you to tell us your story using some of the oral history collection equipment we've got. We'll then build an archive of those stories, and they'll be there for generations to enjoy, be it just to reminisce about what happened at the college, or indeed researching the next book or their memoirs, for example. So the College Voices project, Hazel will give you more details on how to access that. But if you want to get involved, please do. It's a great project and we need your participation. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Hazel, our college curator. She's going to take you on a 100-year journey through the college. Please ask her lots of questions. Enjoy, and we look forward to your feedback at the end of this session. Thanks very much.
Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to this presentation on the history of the college. As 2020 marks our centenary year, I thought that it would be appropriate to spend some time delving together into some of the rich history that the RAF College has got, and our collection over the early part of our history from 1916 to 1946. So I've chunked it up into three parts of the presentation. I'm going to show you artifacts as we go along, and I'll be opening up to questions at the end of every section of the presentation. So it's early days then. We began in November 1915 when Chief Petty Officer Whitlock was told by the Admiralty to go up to Lincolnshire and find us some land, because at that particular point we had the Royal Flying Corps, and training was done at Upavon, but with the introduction of the Royal Naval Air Service, then training at Upavon became inadequate, so they had to find somewhere else. That somewhere else was here at Cranwell. Chief Petty Officer Whitlock chose Cranwell because it was close enough to the east coast to help the defences, and also it was flat, so great for the new aviation phenomena, and also it was in the middle of nowhere, so far enough away from distractions for the new young men who would be coming. We have got Sleaford down the road, of course. That was used for R&R, but they were only allowed there once a week. So it was the farmland that he chose of Mr. Usher Banks, and he chose the Lodge Farm, which is now the Commandant's residence, and the land surrounding it. And the RNAS Central Training Establishment opened in April 1916 because it took them that long to actually build the infrastructure. When the first men came up here, it was fields, it was wet, it was horrible. Any of you who know Lincolnshire know that it's very windy and very flat indeed. So you can imagine the conditions were not that good at all for those first men coming up, and they basically had to bunk down with their hammocks in whatever they could, whatever buildings they could find, the farmhouses. There were 3 cottages as well at that time. So because it was naval, Royal Naval Air Service, it was known as HMS Daedalus. And this brings me to the first object here, which is the HMS Daedalus cap tally. That was very kindly donated a few years ago. We haven't got much from this particular era, so it's really nice to be able to show you something from our beginnings during the First World War. And we also had the railway at that point. There was a branch line which ran from Sleaford to Cranwell. And again, any of you who know Cranwell will have seen the main guard room on Cranwell Avenue, which is the old railway station. And we've got some great pictures of trains there at that particular point. We had, much like today, 2 airfields. So the North Airfield was where personnel were trained to both fly and maintain airships. We've got some fantastic aerial photos in the collection of the airships. And then on South Airfield, it was the fixed wing. So personnel were trained to both fly and maintain fixed wing aircraft. And again, we've got some fantastic shots of the lines of aircraft outside the hangars. And in fact, 2 of the hangars are originals from 1916. It was a very snowy winter up here then, and the ground's covered in snow. They're absolutely fantastic pictures. At that point as well, we had the boy apprentices. And this brings me to my next object, which is a boy apprentice walking out cane. It's actually got, if I can show it to the camera there, it's got the RAF crest in the top there. And this is the cane that the boy apprentices used when they actually went out and about. The boy apprentices were meant to be given the same amount of leave as the men. We had East Camp and West Camp at that particular point. And they weren't. So this was the closest time that the station ever got to mutiny, was when the boys one evening decided, right, we're not going to put up with this. We're all going to march on Prince Albert and demand some the same leave as the men do. I mentioned Prince Albert then. He was, of course, later King George VI, and he was the commanding officer of the Boy Apprentices Wing, Boy Apprentices Training Wing, in 1918. And so when it came to the amalgamation, the RNAS and the RFC, uniforms were an issue because we didn't get the RAF blue-grey until later on. And so because we'd been a naval unit, the stores all had naval uniforms. So whenever the Royal Flying Corps men and boys uniform wear out, they had to change it using RNAS. So quite often they'd have an RFC tunic with RNAS buttons. So it was quite a mix and match of uniforms at that point, as you can imagine. There is a lovely quote for this. Obviously, there's a lot of differences and problems with amalgamating the 2 services. I can't remember the actual chap who said this, but one of the instructors said of the Royal Flying Corps boys that they can salute and march beautifully, but they cannot use a spanner. So this brought problems in itself. Also, the RFC boys and men had trouble with the naval terminology. For instance, port and starboard, and reveille being done in the round, and so lots of the language there was actually more naval. So that then brings us on to the end of the war and 1920. So if any of you would like to ask any questions on that, actually, I've just looked at my notes and seen there's 2 things that I haven't actually shown you, which are perfect for this. which I really need to show you before we have questions. This one, I thought I'd keep it in the wrapper to show you some conservation in action as well. This is an airship notebook, but it's wrapped up in preservation felt and tied up with acid-free tissue. So when this is in the archives, I know what it is. It's got its accession number on, which is its unique identifying number, and I can then pull it out and it's quite nicely covered. So if I just open it up for you here, you'll see that it is actually airship training notebook in olive drab, army olive drab green. We're only actually recently donated this year. I've been a curator 22 years and I've never seen one of these before, so this is really something quite special. We've got Second World War notebooks as well, but if I hold it up there, it's beautifully written, everything's in ink, and he's put drawings, as you can see, it's very fragile. You see drawings there. And what I love about this particular book is that I put acid-free tissue over the fabric, but it's actually got fabric, airship fabric samples in it. So you see through the acid-free tissue there, a few samples of the fabric, which is very fragile. So if you think that's over 100 years old, that is absolutely amazing. So if I just go and put this over here, out of the way. The other First World War item to tell you about is this #1 field service dress cap. As you see, it's got the Air Marshal's cap badge on it. This was actually King George VI's RAF uniform. We have got his entire uniform, but obviously I wasn't going to hold that one up to the camera. But I thought I'd show you his field service dress cap. This was the uniform, his Marshal of the Royal Air Force uniform that he wore when he married the Queen Mother. On his death, she donated his RAF uniform to us, and of course his army to Sandhurst College at Sandhurst, and his naval one to the college at Dartmouth. So this is one of our absolutely prized exhibits that we've actually got on display in the college here. So now I've caught you up with those artefacts, I can open the floor to any questions just on that particular section of the presentation.
Of course. So we've had a message from Terence, says you met Hazel some time ago whilst visiting the RAF Regiment. Hazel mentioned a book about the history of Cranwell. Has the book been written yet?
There has been one written by Haslam, H.B. Haslam, and that ends about 1982. So no, according to Haslam, that's when our history finishes, but no, we haven't written another one yet. Although, having said that, there are booklets, privately published booklets that I should have bought some actually, shouldn't I? These are the series of booklets that I've written. This one was written for the the Royal Air Force's centenary. And then this one I've written a short history on Sir Frank Whittle, one of our boy apprentices. He was one of the last to transfer over to the college in 1926, because although the boy apprentice scheme actually was for the mechanics of the Air Force, because Lord Trenchard, when he set the Air Force up, said the mechanics are just as important. So he set up the boy apprentices training scheme, and Sir Frank Whittle was one of the last to transfer over in 1926, but I'll be telling you a bit more about that later. Got a short history here of Cranwell Station. And the other one, this one is for our centenary year this year, Viscount Templewood and Lord Trenchard partnership. It's actually one of our temporary exhibitions that we've actually got in the college at the moment. So
brilliant, thank you. Terence said I will contact you to buy them, so that's not a problem. What I will do,
they're free.
They're free, there we go. Well,
yes, a donation to the Heritage Fund.
If anyone's interested in those, what I'll do in the chat function now to everyone is I'll put our email address, and if anyone wants to pop through a request to that email address, I'll make sure I pass those on to Hazel. So I can do that now. So that's in the chat function. Hazel, over to you to carry on, if that's all right.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the college was formed then on the 5th of February 1920, and it was the first military air academy in the world. The first flight cadets to actually come to the college, because College Hall was not built at that time, actually lived in the old barrack blocks, which the men had vacated from the war. Now, Lord Trenchard wanted to show that the Air Force was here to stay. So he wanted an impressive building, much like the old college at Sandhurst and Britannia Royal Naval College at Dartmouth. So that's why plans were put into place to actually build College Hall. The architect was Sir James Gray West. Now, the first plans he put forward were based on St Pancras, the Victorian Gothic style, and this didn't actually go down too well. So he then had to change his plans, and he then based it on the Royal Hospital in Chelsea. So that's why we've now got the Wrenesque style of building that, that you see today. The foundation stone was laid in 1929 by Lady Maud Hort, who was the wife of the then Secretary of State for Air, Sir Samuel. And Sir Samuel, as you'll see from this particular booklet, had a huge impact on Trenchard and the building of the college. So he also gave the avenue of limes, which are either side of the orange, the circle of grass in front of the college. So here I've got a photograph of the college being built in 1931 to 1932. They see it's getting there in that particular photo. It was actually completed in 1933, and it was opened by the then Prince of Wales, who later briefly became King Edward VIII, in 1934. And again, we've got some fantastic photos and newspaper articles for that opening. So as I just mentioned, Sir Frank Whittle was one of the last of the boys to transfer over. And he's got an absolutely fascinating story, really, because he was he tried to get into the Air Force a couple of times, and he was rejected because he was very short. He was too short, and his chest wasn't broad enough either. So he tried 3 times, and he was rejected at each time. Now, at that point, you could only try 3 times, and again, it was kind of 3 strikes and you're out. So if you applied 3 times and the Air Force hadn't accepted you, you couldn't apply again as a returning candidate. So Whittle decided that he would reapply as a first-time candidate once he'd grown a bit and he'd done exercise or such like, and then he was actually accepted. The other thing is that, as I said, he was one of the last of the boys to transfer over. Now, the top 5 boy apprentices in that year group could actually transfer over to become flight cadets and learn to fly. Sadly, he was number 6, but he was lucky in the fact that one of the boys ahead of him failed his medical to get into the Flight Cadet College. So that's why Whittle was then able to become a flight cadet, and the rest, as they say, is history. So my Whittle objects, we've got a number. I couldn't lug his desk down here, so I've got instead his ashtray, which is, I've been told, an engine compressor, and it's got Peterhouse College crest there in the centre of it. So that's there you go. There's his ashtray. And I also have behind me here Lord Trenchard's waistcoat. So here you see it with the acid-free tissue on it. He must have been quite a short man as well, or quite a slim man anyway. So here you see it's got the dark fabric on the outside and the light fabric on the inside. So there you go. There's his waistcoat. Now the other famous interwar personality, if you like, that we had at Cranwell was T. Lawrence of Arabia, or T. Shaw, as he was when he was at Cranwell. He was here from 1925 to 1926, and he was the steward to the B Squadron officer and commanding officer, and he basically cleaned and lit the officer's fire. He was like a Batman to him basically, and he also filled out his logbook as well. Biffy Borton, who was the commandant at the time, knew T. Lawrence personally from when he was Colonel Lawrence, and apparently they had tea over at the lodge quite often, which was very, well, it was unheard of for an AC2, second-class aircraftman, to have tea in the lodge with the boss. And he was very annoyed when he heard that Lawrence was here, because he nearly gave the game away, because obviously Lawrence was trying to hide in the ranks. Whilst he was here, he gave the college library a hand-annotated proof copy of the 7 Pillars of Wisdom. And this, he bound it and called it the Complete Aircraftman, basically to get his friends to read it. Obviously, it's got nothing to do with being an aircraftman at all. Inside it, it has got, it's hand annotated, so you can see there, it's got Lawrence's writing, and it's also literally got cut and paste areas where he's written along the side, not in this edition, not in the edition proper. This is where I won't be able to find anything which I want to illustrate. But yes, there are some absolutely great cut and paste, which oh, here we go. There's a better one than this, I know, but I'll show you this one, because if I can get it up to the camera, you can see there that there is literally, he has just cut and paste into the book. He's done some lovely little drawings in it as well. It's an absolute gem, and that's all of these things are usually on display in the college, and when we can welcome visitors to the college, you can actually see them as you go around. Now, also, at the end of the war, we had the Cranwell Post Office, which was on the south side, facing where the college now is, and the postmaster was William Robinson. And he ran the post office throughout the First World War. He was friends with Prince Albert and also with T. Lawrence. And in 1919, in order to say thank you for the services that he gave to the station during the First World War, the officers clubbed together and purchased him this tantalus, which I won't hold it up for long because it's heavy, which in 1919 cost £1,000. Now, the top is silver, and you'll notice that the central decanter, if you can see there, is broken. That was actually dropped in 1920 by the cleaner. So that's always my Antiques Roadshow moment. that obviously would have been worth a lot more had that not been broken. But that is a historical break. So that is in effect now part of the object's provenance and its history. Now the second Mr. Robinson, Stanley, was the second postmaster. He was the son of William, and he was a good sportsman. He presented the station with one of the football trophies, and he was also an excellent pianist. So he was one of the founder members of the college band. So that's the end of the interwar piece. Is there? I'll open it up to the floor. Are there any questions on that one?
Thank you, Hazel. We had a question. If people wanted to visit the college, how do they find out when it opens again, and how do they book?
Right, we do have a general inquiries email on and a general tours email on our website. So the best thing to do is send an email to that. That will then come through to me, and then I'll know that you're interested. And then we can keep you on the books, so when we are open again, you can come. It's actually my colleague, Flight Lieutenant Andy Johnson, who arranges tours. And we also have schools workshops as well, specifically for 8 to 11-year-olds. It's a whole morning, and there's dressing up in RAF uniform. There's a bit of drill with our station discipline sergeant, and a tour of the college, and there's fun things to do as well, and that takes a whole morning. And of course it's free, so if there's any teachers out there who'd like to do this, it is for the Key Stage 2, I think. Key Stage 2 local history, it fits in perfectly with. So if there are any teachers out there who'd like to come, again, I'm sure Andy would love you to get in touch, and when we do open again for visits, we can fit your school in, hopefully. So
thank you, Hazel.
That's how to get in contact with us.
Lovely, no problem. And then again, if people wanted to email the Op Connect, I can always pass it on to Hazel and general inquiry as well. I had a question from Miriam. Sorry, is it true that the foundation stone was laid before there was actual funding allocated to build? The idea being that if the foundation stone was laid, they would have to build it.
Absolutely correct. Yes, yes, it was basically a field, and they thought, well, we'll make a ceremony, we'll lay the foundation stone, and we have actually got the silver trowel that we believe Lady Maud Hoare used to lay the foundation stone. Yes, it was because we were 2 weeks away from a general election, and they didn't actually know whether the new government would give the funding to the college. But they thought, well, as the lady inquiring there says, if we put the foundation stone, then it's going to happen.
Love it. Thank you, Hazel. There's no more questions, so over to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so so onto the wartime station and the college then. Wartime, during the war, officer cadet training actually ceased. It ceased as a college in its flight cadet guise. And the last of the pre-war cadets actually graduated in July 1939 rather than September. So they graduated on their course earlier than they should have done. The September 1939 entry had no training as cadets in the usual sense. These young men just went straight into being airman pilots under training. So, and the senior entry cadets received postings to specialist courses or O2Us, operational training units. So on the 7th of September, the war footing of the college was actually illustrated by the fact that the rank, as I said, the rank of flight cadet changed to AC2, aircraftman second class, the next day. And then the next day after that, they were immediately promoted to LAC, leading aircraftman. So the college became 19 flight training school, and it was one of among many other units on the station. The college hall itself providing accommodation for the airman pilots under training. Other units at RAF Cranwell at that time included number 1 radio school, number 1 signal school, the School of Store Equipment and storekeeping. Number 3, Coastal Command, OTU, and the Electrical and Wireless School. So in the autumn of 1939, the RAF College formed the nucleus of the Wartime Flying Training Organisation. So you had training split into intermediate and advanced flying training squadrons. And the station became, and this is a great quote in Haslam that I mentioned before, the Royal Air Force in miniature, because there were so many units stationed here at that particular time. The first enemy aircraft to attack RAF Cranwell attacked on the 6th of June 1940, and the bombs landed safely in the surrounding fields. So decoy fires were actually set alight to try and draw the enemy bombers towards those places on the field away from the college. And it was the Royal Engineers who protected the airfield in the early war years before the founding of the RAF Regiment. So the college itself was actually camouflaged during the war. Again, we've got a lovely photograph of camouflage netting over the tower, the 150-foot tower. In October 1940, the ground instruction courses were shortened from 6 to 3 months, and as enemy raids increased, night flying training was interrupted, and so the flying accidents increased. The training aircraft in those early war years were used the Hector, the Oxford, and the Miles Master. For those of you who know the area and wondering what Barkston Heath was used for, Barkston Heath was an advanced landing ground at that particular point. One of our big events, although obviously it took place in great secrecy at the time, was on the 15th of May 1941, the first Gloucester Whittle E-2839 jet aircraft made its maiden flight of 17 minutes from Cranwell. That was the first jet aircraft designed with the engine designed by Sir Frank Whittle, taking off in great secrecy. In August 1941, an incendiary bomb hit the college roof in the A Squadron officer's flat, and the only damage with this was one tile was cracked, no other damage. And this was the only occasion that the college hall was actually hit by enemy bombs, because the German High Command knew that Cranwell existed. In fact, there had been a delegation in 1937 to RAF Cranwell and the college of General Major Stumpf, Udet, and another one which leaves me at the moment. Basically, it was seen on the face of things as a goodwill gesture, and they donated two copies of von Richthofen and von Berlicher, of course, their First World War aces. The originals hung in the Reichstag, so these were copies given in the hope, and bearing in mind this was 1937, 1938, that our two air forces would not have to fight each other again. We responded with portraits of our First World War VC heroes, Mannock and Bull. Of course, the Reichstag burnt, so our portraits are the only ones that actually survive of those two gentlemen. So yes, the Luftwaffe very much knew about the college, but again, Hermann Goering was so convinced that they were going to win. He said, don't attack the college, because he wanted it as his headquarters when they did win. So that's why the college survived intact, well, from enemy bombers anyway. The college did, however, suffer war damage on the 18th of March 1942, when an Armstrong Whitworth Whitley from number 3 Coastal Command OTU hit the tower between A and B wings. The aircraft crashed into the lecture room, but there were no casualties. Luckily, there were no casualties on the ground at that point, but the 3 aircrew in the aircraft were killed. The fuel tanks were full at the time, assuming probably the aircraft had just taken off, and a large fire started, and lots of damage to that particular part of the building. And now when we go up into the loft at that end of the building, there's still the scorch marks can actually be seen from that crash. So there was also a hospital at RAF Cranwell from 1916 to 1940, an RAF hospital. But in 1940, it was decided that it would be too dangerous to have an RAF hospital on an active station. So it was moved to the old Rawsby Psychiatric Hospital, the village very close to the station, which then became number 4 RAF Hospital, Rawsby. This became a satellite of Sir Archie Mackindow's pioneering plastic surgery, his main hospital, of course, being at East Grinstead. And Mackindow, during the height of the war, actually visited twice a week to administer to his burns patients. And the Crash and Burn Centre in number 4 RAF Hospital was known as the Annex. It was actually under the command of Squadron Leader Fenton Braithwaite, and they basically would select patients to see who needed their care and attention. And actually the nurses were chosen on their ability to cope with the appearance of the patients, as well as the new nursing techniques, the brine baths, etc. So this was really new because the protocols of age and status were ignored. So young and gifted ladies could actually assume positions of authority far earlier than at that particular point they would have been expected to in other hospitals. So one of the famous patients there was Wing Commander Guy Gibson. He, at this particular point, he was the officer commanding 106 Squadron at RAF Coningsby. And although we don't actually know the exact reason why he was there, a colleague recalled that at one point he suffered from otitis media, which is apparently a complaint of the middle ear, which is common in aviators. So it could be said that that's why he was there. Any of you who know your Guy Gibson history will also know he had an affair with a nurse, Maggie North, and Maggie North was actually based at the hospital, and they actually met when she was attending a crash at Coningsby, I believe. So throughout the war, there were many changes of units in and out, many different types of aircraft, far too numerous to go into here, I'm afraid. And the 540, the operational record book for the station, makes very interesting reading. And the National Archives at Kew have it. So VE Day on May the 8th was very quiet here. The 540 states that business was very much as usual, but the station did have a visit from King George VI on the 13th of June 1945. On 12th of September 1945, Air Commodore R. Actually was appointed the first post-war commandant designate of the college when it actually reopened as a flight cadet college. And Group Captain Peel, who had been commanding officer of 19 Flying Training School, was the assistant commandant. So the first post-war course began with 19 FTS forming the senior entry, which was 45 entry, and the first 15 new cadets reported on the 16th of October 1946 for the post-war reopening of the college. A number of well-known Battle of Britain and Second World War pilots actually came through the college in the 1920s and 1930s, including Pitcairn Hill, who was on 83 Squadron with Guy Gibson, Douglas Bader, of course, Peter Townsend, then there's Brian Kinkham, Francis Victor Beamish, Derek Dowding, son of Lord Hugh Dowding, also a Battle of Britain pilot, Tim Elkington, and John Peel, who was also a former deputy commandant, and Howard Burton. So I've got some artefacts to show you which relate to these particular years as well. Here we've got, if I can show it up to, we don't actually have any old aircraft in the college, but we do have a bit of one. Here you go. There, you can see the other side of my office there as well. This is the mirror from Flight Lieutenant Feeney's last Spitfire that he flew. It was a Mark 9 Spitfire, and he's recorded it in his logbook. His very last flight was in April 1946. He was actually a member of the Goldfish Club, having ditched in the Mediterranean in 1944, and he was picked up by a walrus. So that's why he can be a member of the Goldfish Club. And he trained under the Empire Air Training Scheme in Canada. We also have, I've mentioned Howard Frizzell. Howard Frizzell, who was one of our flight cadets, and he was also a Battle of Britain pilot. This is his logbook. For those of you with a keen eye, knowing that logbooks are usually blue, he obviously covered this in brown paper like we used to with our school books as well. So there's the first page of the logbook, and if I can find his, this covers his training from 38 to 39. And then if we can go to May 1940, flick through to August. He was doing a lot of convoy patrols. August 1940, there we go, first week in August. It's a bit difficult on this camera, but I hope that that gives you a bit of an idea of what he did. So that's August. Very, very mainly convoy patrols. And then if we skip to see what he was doing on September 15th, Battle of Britain Day. Got September the 14th here. Let's see what he was doing on September the 15th. Just here we go. Cloud flying, battle climb, patrol, dusk, and flying to Duxford. There we go. If I can just, there we go, the date up there, and you can see, I'll show you that, what he was actually doing at that particular point. So this is actually quite a neat logbook. Some of them, the RAF Museum actually have Douglas Bader's logbooks, and they're not the neatest in the world. So there you go. That's one of our flight cadets' Battle of Britain wartime logbooks. Okay, I mentioned Group Captain John Peel being one of our former deputy commandants and Battle of Britain pilot, and this is one of his combat reports. Again, a lot of the combat reports are actually in the collection at the RAF Museum in their archives, but this is pretty much a normal form that they would fill in when they came back from ops. Oh, there we go. You can see that, and it's all handwritten, numbers of aircraft he shot down, and then you've got his actual account of the battle there. And this one, there's a lot of it. He even goes over the other side. So this is actually a very good combat report as a primary document as a historian, because he really goes into detail. And there you see his signature as squadron leader. So to give you a bit of a background on Peel, as I say, he was one of our deputy commandants. He opened his account of battle tallies on the 7th of July when he shared in the destruction of Adornia 17, and he was actually shot down whilst flying a Hurricane over the Channel on the 11th of July, and he ditched off Selsey Bill. Semi-conscious, he was picked up by the Selsey lifeboat. and it's believed that in this action he destroyed another aircraft. He was back in the air on the 17th of July and damaged a Junkers Ju-88 near St Catherine's Point, but had to return to Tangmere, RAF Tangmere, as his aircraft was also damaged. He added further to his tally of victories when he shared the destruction of a further Dornier 17, a Junkers Ju-88, 2 Ju-87s, and a Messerschmitt 109. And in this engagement, he was actually damaged, slightly injured, and he made a forced landing on the Isle of Wight on the 11th of August. He was awarded the DFC on the 13th of August. He commanded 145 Squadron. He was appointed wing leader at RAF Kenley in March 1941, and adding further to his tally with damaging 2 Messerschmitt 109s. He was shot down in the Channel in July 1941, but was picked up and led the wing the following morning. He was awarded the DSO in August 1941 and appointed sector commander and wing leader at RAF Debden. He was promoted to group captain and in 1943 became a deputy director of fighter operations at the Air Ministry and assistant commandant at the college from 1947 to 1948. And we have a fantastic drawing by Cuthbert Ord of him on the wall of deputy commandants. So that's a quick sort of canter through why Peel is, John Peel is important to us. And I should have said when I was talking about Frizzell, Howard Frizzell Burton, I've got a short bio of him here as well. And he graduated in December 1936, and he was one of the Sword of Honour winners, which is the highest award which a flight cadet can get. And he was posted to 46 Squadron at RAF Digby. After nearly 3 years there, he was posted to 66 Squadron at Duxford as a flight commander in October 1939. He opened his tally on May the 12th, 1940, and shared in the destruction of a Heinkel 111. The following months, he had another probable Heinkel 111, damaged Junkers 88, and a share in the destruction of another Heinkel. Promoted to squadron leader and given command of 616 Squadron at RAF Kenley in September 1940. He next added to his victories on the 21st of June 1941, sharing in the destruction of a Messerschmitt 109. His first DFC was gazetted on the 19th of September 1941. 1942, he was posted to the Middle East and became a wing leader of 239 Kitty Hawk Wing and awarded a Barty's DFC on the 23rd of February 1943. His DSO came in April of 1943. Sadly though, he didn't survive the war. He was returning to the UK as a passenger on a Hudson on the 3rd of June 1943 when it was sadly lost with all its personnel over the Bay of Biscay. So he's remembered on the Runnymede Memorial. So that's just two of the things that the two of our cadets actually did in the Battle of Britain, and I thought it was worth bringing that out since it is the 80th anniversary this year. We also have, I've saved the best to last really, or in my view the best to last. We have this very important bit of paper, and people ask me what my favourite object is in the collection. I love the King's uniform, of course, but this piece of paper is what, well, I would say arguably won us the war. I know that's a big thing to say, but I do say arguably. It's the letter that Dowding wrote in May 1940 saying not one more fighter be sent to France because it will involve the final, complete and irremediable defeat of this country. HCT Dowding. Now that is, he wrote this in May 1940 to the Air Ministry, and it really is something to say, I'm not going to send you any more fighters, even though the French has asked for them and the Prime Minister's promised them. So this is, as I say, one of our best artefacts. And if I just hold it up to the camera there, so you can see he wrote it at Bentley Priory. pretty much on normal wartime foolscap paper. Then if I turn it over, you will see that famous line. If any of you know the film The Battle of Britain, it's the one that Laurence Olivier is reading out as he's walking down the corridors. So you'll see the final complete defeat of this country, and that's his signature down there as well. Then you've got the original stamp. I don't know how well that will show up on the computer. Not very well, probably. But that stamp, which is actually May 1940. So, as I say, that's one of our crown jewels. And finally, we have this object, which is an original VC. There we go, if I hold it up to the camera. This is Flying Officer Kenneth Campbell's VC that was donated to us, I think last year now. And he was one of the wartime pilot airman under trainings that I spoke about earlier. He was on number 5 course. He also attended Clare College, Cambridge, so we have links with the University of Cambridge Air Squadron. He was commissioned on the 23rd of August 1938, and after a brief spell of service training here, he joined 22 Squadron on the 28th of September 1940. He took full part in the Battle of the Atlantic, and this introduced him to the Coastal Command role of attacking enemy shipping. So he flew Beaufort's, the torpedo bomber. And it was whilst he was flying a Beaufort of 22 Squadron Coastal Command, he was detailed to attack the Gneisenau, one of Germany's highly formidable battleships. There were 3 of them, the Gneisenau, the Scharnhorst and the Prinz Eugen. And it was known that they were actually berthed in Brest Harbour at this particular point in 1941. So the weather was really awful. The bombers who should have gone in to soften up the target were unable to take off. He took off from St Evell Airfield in Cornwall, which was a grass airfield at the time, and so very boggy because it'd been raining a lot. And he, 2 of them managed to make it through to the target, and but neither of them, because of cloud, neither of them knew the other one was there. So basically, Campbell made the decision to go and attack. He knew that it would be pretty much a suicidal attack because he didn't have any backup. He didn't know whether the defence had been quietened down or not. It was his 20th operational sortie, and his initial approach was from 300 feet, diving to 50 foot as the harbour mole came into view. And basically he had to dive down low so that the torpedo would have an effective run to its target. So as the mole came under the aircraft's nose, he released the torpedo and then climbed to port and headed for the hills above Brest. But of course, the defences opened up. They hadn't been quietened down, and he was in a very vulnerable position climbing away. So sadly, he crashed into Brest Harbour and it killed all of the crew. However, his torpedo ran true, and it blew a 40-foot hole in the starboard side of the Gneisenau, which crippled it. And this forced the Germans to use all their resources to repair it. Her sister ship, the Scharnhorst, had to stay in the harbour as well for the time being. 8 months later, the Gneisenau was still being repaired because its propeller shaft had actually been extensively damaged in the attack. Churchill had asked for a supreme sacrifice to be made to actually knock these capital ships of the Kriegsmarine out of action, and he'd actually made it. he was awarded a posthumous VC, this one here, on the 13th of March 1942, and his parents collected it from the King at investiture on the 23rd of June 1943. So a quote from Flight Lieutenant Arthur Aldridge wrote in the last of the torpedo flyers: "There was only one possible conclusion: Campbell had no chance." But we're very lucky that his family has donated the VC to the college, and also a lot of his documents and photographs as well. So, as you can imagine, over 100 years, there's a lot of history to actually cover. So I do hope that that's given you an idea of the history of Cranwell, the RAF Cranwell, in the early part of its century. And I hope you've enjoyed our journey through the history of the college and the artefacts that I've chosen to show you today. Obviously, just a few that you could see if you actually visited. So I just wanted to leave you with two thoughts. As Station Commander Gordon Bettington said, if you would like to leave part of your memory of your RAF service to the college, we do have the College Voices project, so please do get in touch. We'd be very happy to hear from you and record when we can welcome visitors to the college again. And of course, all these lovely objects that I've shown you are donations from members of the public. So we do rely for our collection on donations. So we understand, of course, that lots of these things are very precious to you and your families, but if you did want to find anything absolutely fascinating in your lofts and such like, we would be absolutely delighted to consider taking them into the collection. So again, do please just get in touch with me, and that would be marvellous.
Thank you, Hazel. We've had lots of lovely comments through. There was a question from Sarah. Did any medical officers get any training at Cranwell during the early years, so the mid-30s?
Sorry, you broke up a bit in that. I got to the early years.
Did any medical officers get any training at Cranwell during the early years, so the mid-30s?
Not that I'm aware of. It tends to be just flying training and I believe engineering as well.
Thank you. Sarah says those logbooks are such a snip of history. They were fascinating to look at. We've had a comment through Miriam. Thank you, Hazel, very interesting. Jeff says brilliant, very informative. A massive thank you for a great presentation from Terence, so that's lovely. Sarah asks how many items are held in the collection?
Oh, well, I've accessioned, catalogued over 6,000, with many more to go, mainly the archives, because the archive just holds absolute gems, but I haven't been able to accession everything yet, so who knows what lies in store in there. I mean, we have got Sir Winston Churchill's autograph book from his Dakota that he flew on during the war, and we've got a letter written by him as well. So yes, we do have some absolute gems, so who knows what else is hiding, waiting for me to find.
Love it. We've had just a comment from Anita. Many thanks, really interesting and enjoyable presentation. And from Helen, who says thank you so much, it was absolutely marvellous and leaves me wanting to know more, so that's really lovely. And then Caroline says thank you very much, very interesting. Paul, very interesting and informative. Thanks for taking the time to put together the presentation. That one is from Marius there. So there was a question through, let me just scroll up and find it. How will the history of RAF Halton be melded with the distinguished history of RAF College when the RAF Halton moves to Cranwell?
Oh, that's a very interesting one. And one that I can't really answer, I'm afraid, until it actually happens. as you probably know, Halton have their own museum. So I am in touch with their curator. I'm not quite sure what their plans are for their collection or their museum, because they have an archive as well. And of course we do have limited space. So I think the answer to that is watch this space.
I love it. Very good. Marius says, wonderful presentation. Thank you. Just lots of super stuff. Thank you from Matt. So there's some lovely comments there. So I'd like to take the opportunity to echo all of those, Hazel. So thank you for your time today and for your fabulous stories and your passion on everything that you do. So we're very grateful. Thank you so much. For everyone joining us, you've got the email address, which is opconnect@rafa.org.uk. So if you would like me to pass anything through to Hazel, you can email that email address and I will pop that through for you. So Hazel, thank you for your time. Everyone, thank you for joining us today. And we're joined tomorrow by AVM Finn Monaghan, so that'll be a really great session, same time, and you can find the details on our website. Thank you so much, Hazel.